Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me on another of my interview series. Today I'm talking to Nigel Law, a retired teacher after 24 years. He's going to tell us how the exam systems work and all of that. It's going to blow the whistle. Better than that, he's another baldy like myself. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Nigel. Welcome to the show. Hello, Nigel.
Hello there, Richard. Thank you very much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure for me because I'm fascinated about the whole school system.
Yeah.
My kids no longer go to the school system, but I've got grandchildren who are just about to enter into it. And my partner, the lovely Julia, she has a 12-year-old who's in the school system and struggling, and a 3-year-old who is going to be signed up or not, depending on, she's thinking about that for him. And we've been looking at homeschooling recently with a number of people, the problems of bullying in schools and all those sort of things. So it's great to have a retired teacher. So, Nigel, could you first of all just tell us a little bit about your teaching background?
Yeah, well, I had 4 years in business before going into teaching. I worked in the pottery industry, which I think helps, gives you a little bit of a kind of a broader background. But
Yeah.
then, but then I moved into teaching everyone's favorite subject, mathematics. And
Maths.
exactly. And most of my time was in northern coastal, quite working class background schools that, the schools didn't, weren't, high achieving grammar school type schools.
So
Uh,
quite tough, I would imagine. Quite tough
yeah,
bunch.
tough and rewarding.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
so yeah, but obviously it all leads to the exams at the end before pupils go off and either stay in education or go off and do their thing. And over my teaching career, the pressure on mathematics, on mathematics departments has gone through the roof. It's now like a benchmark for the school, to say whether or not it is a outstanding school or a failing school. So schools have measures that they have to meet, and
Mm.
those measures have moved up over time. So the benchmark measure is how many pupils get 5 A stars to C, including English and maths. What percentage of your pupils get that? And if schools don't meet certain targets, well, then they can end up in certain categories and have, lots of inspectors coming in or being taken over or that kind of thing. So the pressure on mathematics department and on English has gone through the roof over the years.
So let me ask you first of all, how in your 24 years of teaching
Yeah.
mathematics, what's the sort of general aptitude of students to that subject? Because I would imagine, having gone to school, I found maths particularly tricky. And we went through the when I was at school, we went through the whole decimalisation of thinking in 12s into
Yeah.
10s, which did make life a little bit easier because 10 was a rounder number.
Well, that's you've your question hits the nail straight on the head straight away. So was it? I've written I've written a little book on it, called "If You Tolerate This." I'll just give you a quick flash.
Yeah, please do.
It's up on Amazon. If you
Just
tolerate
show,
it.
show it again. There we
Oop,
go.
oop, there
Bit
you go.
more in front of you,
There
and
you go.
high, and that's it. If you tolerate this,
Yeah,
by Nigel Law.
yeah. So that's up on Amazon, and basically, and it starts off with the question: if you personally were suddenly put in charge of an education system in a country,
Yeah.
and you started it off very simply with English and mathematics, the first question is: so pupils are going to go in at 5 years old, they're going to leave at 16, having studied English and maths for those 11 years. What percentage of those pupils would you like to pass?
Well, presumably you know if they're going in and the exams are that important, you'd want them to pass 100% if you could.
But that's not what happens in the GCSE system. 57% of pupils are allowed to pass, and 43% are purposefully failed.
Purposefully
That,
failed.
Was it yes? Basically, how so I'll switch between. Basically, if you like, your children, your grandchildren, if they go for a job, they'll say, "Have you passed your English and maths?"
Mm.
If you go for a college course, they'll say, you know, basically, you need that benchmark of passing English and maths at level 4 and above,
Yeah.
plus three random others. That's a benchmark. And if you get that, you can go on certain courses, get certain jobs. And if you don't get that benchmark, then you can't. But this is the conundrum underneath it. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but when when the exam board take an exam, they
Yes.
they need the results to come out looking like that shape. It's called the normal distribution curve. So there'll be basically it needs to come out that shape so that you have, it tails off towards 100. It's out of 240 the maths paper, but it tails off towards a 240. So very few people get the high scores, and it tails off towards zero. So very few people don't get anything. And the exam board, they call it getting a good spread. So exam results of pupils have to come out in that shape. So most people round the middle. And so that's how they have to have it spread out.
Yes.
I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit, but if we're talking about the exam, there's two main types of being examined. There's a standards-based test. So an example of a standards-based test is your driving exam. So most people end up taking a driving test at some point, and you are compared to a fictitious competent driver. The driving instructor, or the person taking the test, will have a list of criteria,
Mm.
and you will have certain things that you have to do, and if you do them, they're ticked off. And you're allowed so many minor errors and no big errors. You're not allowed to run anyone over or mount a curb or something like that.
Well, I should
So
hope not.
exactly. So when you're talking about 100% passing, that's
Right.
kind of a little bit like that. That's a standard. You meet that standard, then you can pass. An alternative way of testing is a rank. I'll just give you a simple example, like the
Mm.
100 meters final. 10 people turn up at the 100 meters final. The gun goes off. They race to the finish. The first person who crosses the finish line gets gold, second silver, third gold. We all know how it works. So the interesting difference between the two is on the first one, you're trying to meet a criteria, a standard.
Yeah.
In the second one, there's no set finish time. So the winning time in the Olympics this year could be slower than 4 years ago, could be slower than 40 years ago. Technically, three people could, well, technically, nine people could trip up at the start, break the leg, and you could just stroll, finishing whatever time.
Yeah.
So there's no set time. So there's two different types of tests. So the question is,
Which one's
what,
the best?
or if I'll refer a lot to maths, but basically it's similar. It's the same with other subjects. So do you it's the question for you and your listeners, do you think that the maths exam is a standard? Are you reaching a particular standard to get a level 4, or are you being ranked? And there's a claim that you are reaching a standard, you've met level 4, but it is a rank. It's a
Oh,
complicated rank,
right. Oh, I see. Hence your. Well,
hence the
I was
graph.
coming
Yeah,
back to your purposefully
yeah.
failed.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is that how results work are it's
Can you
then
just bring it back a bit?
back a bit there,
Yeah, yeah, and a bit higher.
there.
That's it. We can't see you, but we can see we can see
Yeah, yeah,
the
that's
thing.
fine. So basically, once you got the idea,
Yeah.
um, so what happens is that every year as a maths teacher, you'll have a year 11 or maybe, year 10 pupils will say, we've got our maths exam coming up, sir. You'll perhaps be doing past papers. And they'll say to their teacher, what percentage do I need to pass? and then the teacher will go a little bit sheepish because they don't know.
Right.
The, so unlike a driving test where where the driving, the
The
driving
tester.
examiner,
Yeah.
the tester knows what criteria you have to meet. In maths, yes, there'll be the questions, but there's no set mark yet for your level 4, level 5. What happens is that the exam try and get that spread, and then they go backwards through it. So if there's 500,000 people take the exam, they want to give 2.5% a level 9. So you go back through the scores, go through 2.5% of 500,000, find the lowest score, and then that pupil then becomes the benchmark for a level 9. And then if you want 5% to get a level 8, you'll go through 5%. And then what percentage you want for a level 7. So you're literally going back through, and there's basically you end up with then 3 critical sections. Okay, I'll try my best to get this last one up.
Okay.
You end up with 3 critical sections. Is that okay?
Yeah, just a bit higher.
There
we go. Yeah, and down a fraction. There we go.
right.
Look at that. Failures. What's the middle one?
So
failures, nurses and doctors. Oh, okay.
So I know that's a simplistic measure. It's a simplistic way of describing it, but they work back through, and if you get a level 7, 8, or 9, well, then you can go and
it determines your career.
It determines your career,
right?
Yeah. So you can go and become a doctor. You'll need those grades. Levels 4, 5, 6, levels 4 and above. If you go for a job, they'll say, "Have you passed maths?" Technically, a level 3 is a pass, but they mean level 4 or above. So as you slice backwards, finding your 2%, 2.5% of level 9s all the way down to a level 4, you are fixing the amount of people who pass and fixing the amount of people who fail. That's the first thing that happens straight off.
So if people, let's say those 500,000 people that you all put in, let's just say instead of children, they were cats or monkeys or something. And just let's just suppose that some of those were a little bit brighter than other cats, but not as intelligent as humans. Are you suggesting that, in other words, what I'm trying to get to is if you had a whole load of dumb people, there would still be a winning bunch who would effectively get the A's and the A's plus, but they might not be comparable to a previous year's who were, let's say, highly intelligent.
No.
And so
it doesn't compare year on year.
Right. That's what I was trying to understand. So in other words, one year,
each year is independent to every other year.
Right. That's fascinating because as a parent, you're assuming that they've met a certain standard, and that they're going off into with a certain level of brightness or intelligence or whatever it is you want to call it.
The thing to watch out for with these things is that question has been asked, and there is a cover given. But the thing to always watch out for is whether you think that the cover has been given after the event rather than before. So the answer to your question is that the sample size being 500,000 is so big that it doesn't, because it's 500,000, statistically it won't make any difference year on year. So there's no such thing as a good year and a bad year.
Right.
Is the argument.
Yeah.
So
that okay. So let me just ask you. I mean, okay. So that's the system as it is.
Yeah.
What comes across to me is it's a bit like the medical profession, and we've gone through a certain pandemic, haven't we? And we've been given one cure that is supposed to do it. So one size fits all. It seems to me that the school work and how you examine children is not based on that individual person at all. That like a doctor giving medicine to a patient would want to sort of think about them as an individual. How is it going to work for them?
Yeah.
And as a pupil, it's like you're just being funneled through a system that potentially is rigged against you.
Well, it's rigged against 43%.
Right.
So it doesn't, 43% have to fail.
They have to fail.
They have to fail.
So even if you had 500,000
Yeah.
incredibly identical clones, and they were all apps the
Uh,
same intelligence,
yeah.
43% of those would fail for no reason other than the fact that it's the structure of the
Yeah.
examination.
Yeah. And so that, but that is the overall system. The exam board have to get that good spread, and then they have to slice it up. That is the primary function. The
And why
second,
is that? That's the million
because
dollar question, isn't it?
yes, exactly, exactly. It's worked to it over the years, but I've got some details I think you'll be really interested in. But this has changed over the years. When I first worked, I had a year out before going to uni, and where I worked, there were two different. It was a part of the NHS, and there were two different types of managers. There were those that had been to university, and there were those that had started at the bottom and worked up.
Mm.
That's going. You now have jobs that say you need GCSEs, you need degrees, but only it's just less than 50%, I think now, but only 50%, less than 50% of the population have got a degree. So when you've, there will be things that you will talk about on your channel that say, oh, you've got vaccinated people and unvaccinated people, and the government may treat people differently.
Mm.
That's already here.
So what? So have I got this right? That you're
Yep.
saying that modern day workplace,
Yep.
you're required a certain number of qualifications, GCSEs, and like with being a nurse, you've got to have a university degree or something now. You've got to have, you can't just
That's
go in because
that's
you're
why that's why I have that nurse measure.
right.
You never used to have a degree to be a nurse.
Exactly. So now, so what you've said there is that
Yep.
you've got to reach a certain criteria, and yet
Yeah.
in order to work in certain sectors, because
Yeah.
that's what's required,
Yeah.
like being a nurse, and
Yeah.
yet 43% of those children going through the school system will
Yeah.
never achieve that. You
No.
can't work out which ones they are, but they won't because of this rigging.
Yeah. So they can, there's, they'll leave a door open and say you can go and resit and things like that.
Hmm.
But you're back in the pot again. So
Yeah.
you're back in
And
the pot
time,
next
meanwhile,
time.
time is
Time's
against
moving
you.
on,
Yeah.
but you're back in the pot. And when you're in that pot of retaking that exam, there's still that chunk that are going to fail. So,
Yes.
so me as a teacher, it's called like yes, people will learn maths and English, but part of it is a zero sum game. If I helped a pupil to pass, some other child somewhere else would fail.
Yes.
So for every 57 that pass, there's got to be another 43 that fail. And it really does split like that. And it didn't used to be the case. It used to be the case that less people went to university, and you were allowed to work up. Um, you're interviewing me. I've got no idea whether or not you have a degree, whether you've passed your maths. You said you've said you've kind of stumbled onto this, but that's it's not exactly what's happened. You've trained yourself up over time.
Yes.
Um, it- there was nobody anywhere with a criteria that said you had to pass English and maths before you did this.
No,
There's
absolutely. I mean, you're
yeah,
absolutely right. This is fortunately with YouTube, it's a
yeah,
democracy. Anyone can just launch a channel, and it's whether you're any good at it yourself,
yeah,
or you've put time. So many other factors and luck and the algorithm, of course. But
yeah,
the one thing you haven't got to do is go through an exam process,
no,
which potentially you could fail at, which then may make you demoralize you
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, was it the history of it kind of gets kind of lost over time, but it started to happen um under the early stages of Margaret Thatcher's government, believe it or not, when they stopped funding, when they stopped pumping money in, basically the government decided to, do cutbacks and not support British Leyland and things like that. There was mass unemployment, particularly mass youth unemployment. And what happened is that there was a real concern that this would lower wages. And people looked around, and more jobs decided to try and become professions. I literally remember watching it on the news that there would be people that said, "Oh, we're not quite sure that there'll be enough in our job to get a degree, but we've spoken to the university and we're working with the university, and we think we can put a degree together." Which, of course, now when you can do a degree in Harry Potter studies and everything, so there was the original aim was to protect people's wages from this mass unemployment. And the government were happy to go along with it at the time because it took the youth off unemployment and put them into education.
Right.
So it was a kind of temporary win-win. But yeah, so we've now got to this hardened state. So something like a nurse, you never used to be able to have to get a degree.
Mm.
So you have to pass maths and English. That's 57% of the population. Well, previously it would have been about 90% of the population would have been okay to go on to a nurse's course. And then the nurse's course would then train them and either train them up and then they would fail or pass at the nurse's training, not having to do maths and English beforehand. And we've not mentioned it, but as well as on your maths exam, there's percentages and fractions and things like that. You're asked for things like Pythagoras. The other thing that students say every year is, when am I ever going to need this?
Right.
And the vast majority of your subject, you're never ever going to learn again. So you're being tested in something with a 43% failure rate. So you're not learning how to be a nurse. You're learning how to write an essay on Romeo and Juliet. You're learning about Pythagoras. And then from that, whoever writes the top 57% essays in Romeo and Juliet can go and become a nurse. And the ones that don't do so good on a Romeo and Juliet essay can't. Which, when you kind of pause to think about it, it's
wrong.
It's not exactly connected, is it?
No, absolutely. And so let me ask you this then, with your experience, 24 years of doing, and we'll come to an interesting thing with Rishi Sunak, because in his recent speech at the beginning of the year, he was saying about how important maths is, and he wants to thrust that down everybody's throat. And of course, just before that, there, as you said there, you're being taught a load of stuff that you don't necessarily know. And these days, so much of what you might need to use, say, Pythagoras for, is done for you by computers, calculators, So as long as you can operate one of those, they're not going to disappear. But my question I wanted to ask you was then, are exams necessary?
Well, it depends on what on what it is that you want to on what it is that you want to achieve. My argument is that the maths and English ability that's required to pass GCSE exams and A levels is way beyond the maths and English required to go and be a nurse. So that normal distribution curve, I don't think that only 50% of the population is fit to apply to be a nurse. I think it's 85, 90, maybe more.
Yes.
That's my argument. That's my argument with it. I think hidden in what you're saying is the fact that five A stars it's now 9 to 4. Those 5 GCSEs, including English and maths, is called a universal qualification.
Right.
That means that even though you took maths, English literature, geography, and catering, those 5, if you get a level 4 in all 5, is now a universal qualification that you have. Basically, what's happening is our kids are coming out stamped like eggs in a supermarket.
Right.
Jumbo, large, medium, small. And you're, and yeah, so they're coming out. You're a level 4 kid. You've got a degree. So you've got a degree in criminology. Well, unfortunately, there's no jobs in criminology, but don't worry about it. You can get the manager's job at the insurance company and somebody else can't. That's where I think it's kind of gone a bit too far.
Yeah, I can
Um,
see. Yeah, I
yeah,
can absolutely see that. And of course, children, their aptitude develops at different times depending on a whole load of circumstances. And so
correct.
again, you've averaged out children by age,
Yeah,
which even that
yeah,
within the school year, if you happen to be born in September or
yeah,
you happen to be born in June
yeah,
and you're in the same year,
yeah,
you've got 6 to 9 months apart in
yeah,
which the brain is still trying to develop or catch up or not, and then you've got all your home
yeah,
problems and environment, the environment of the society in general,
yeah.
and if you've gone through the lockdown years, you've got outside influences on top of all of that.
Yeah, so it may be, we'll have people listening that it's such a difficult thing to shake off that these things aren't, doing what we think that they're doing. So I'll go through. I'll go through a couple of a bit more details about the exam if I can, Richard, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
please do. Yeah, no.
So the first thing to think of is that maths exam is out of 240 marks. And as you cut those slices back down through the levels, there will be an exact number. So let's say it's 106 out of 240. And that is the minimum mark that you require to get a level 4.
Right.
There could be 10,400 people on 106, and there could be 10,200 people on 105. They both round to 44%, but you get 105, no, you're not a nurse. You get 106, yes, you can come and have a look. That's the cutoff. And now people might say, oh, well, you have to cut it off somewhere. And I've said my argument. I think that if people can pass a little entry test, can you, do some basic maths, do some basic English, or lower it down, and then, so that 90% can apply to be a nurse, and then the nurses course selects people.
Yes.
There's other skills in there.
Yes.
It used, there were people who there's people who are nurses now who don't have English and maths because they're older and they didn't have to do them, and they're doing a perfectly good job, but their children might not be allowed to apply. So that's the first thing. There'll be a cutoff. But here's a question for you. What your, by saying
Hmm.
your a person's exam is being marked by a human being. Human beings have different opinions and they have human error. So your paper being marked will have a human error element. So even though there's a cutoff, 100%, 106 yes, 105 no, what percentage do you think what percentage error is it of a maths paper, the easiest one to mark? What percentage error is it that, so instead of by one grade up or down, so a pupil, instead of getting a level 4, what the old C grade, which is what they need,
Yeah.
they either ended up with a B or they ended up with a D, a full grade error. What percentage of maths papers, the easiest ones to mark by the government, by the exam board's measure, do you think is the error? So they didn't get a C, they either got a
Yeah.
B or a D.
So room for manoeuvre. Do you mean by that, or
Yeah, no, so yeah, so if when they checked the papers, they standardized the papers,
Yes.
and they
So
said,
in theory,
yeah,
if you put it through a machine
yeah. If you put it
and
through
a
a perfect
human,
machine and a human,
and in
yeah,
theory it should be absolutely the same, but because it's not
correct.
through a machine, it's through a human.
Humans,
What room for? Well, I guess ideally none, but maybe 10% room for error.
it was 17.8%,
Right,
nearly a fifth.
and that could be all sorts of different. I mean, if you well, these examiners, they don't know the pupils, so they
No,
can't.
no. Well, no. Well, they just no. They've got the paper in front of them,
Yeah,
and one teacher is marking a question
yeah.
and giving that question a full 4 marks when it was only worth 2 marks. Or somebody else is marking that question and it should be 4 marks, yet they mistakenly only give it two out
So
of
there's
their
so
own
there's
human error.
error. There's sort of
So
error,
there's a correct
or
mark,
right,
but because it's marked by a human, there's human error.
right, and potentially bias, I suppose, because if
Yeah, yeah,
let's say the
yeah.
writing
Well,
was really scruffy,
well,
yet everything was correct.
or it'll probably more likely be you've just got somebody who's quite generous than that,
Right. Yeah.
and somebody
Okay.
who's very, very strict,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
But if your paper is marked by somebody who's strict, you get a level 3 and no nurse for you. Your paper's marked by somebody who's very generous, you get a level 4 and a nurse for you. But you both open your paper on that second to last Thursday in August, and your friends passed and you haven't, yet
Mm.
you actually did better than them. And that's 17.8 in the government's own measure. Now, just as a quick aside, when they changed from the letter grade to the number grade, so from instead of it being A star down to G,
Yeah.
they switched over to 9 to 1. That's 10 slices rather than 9. So the actual slices of marks, the gaps between the marks, go narrower. And they went back and checked the data and found that it would have been bigger than 17.8%. It would have gone up to, I think it's 25.7, almost 26%. A quarter of papers would have been given a grade either one too high or one too low. In maths, the easiest subject to mark. So Crikey
And
knows how history essays and English essays are marked.
well, exactly. And I haven't been in the school system for a long time. You often see kids when they do these things on the telly and what have you, and that when they get their exams, and some of them are in tears, and they say, "Well, you can challenge it." Can people challenge the result and say it's been unfairly marked and things like that?
They can, but because schools are under pressure for results, it'll quite often be the school that'll do it.
Right.
But of course, you have to pay. So what will happen is if the pass mark out of the 240 for maths was 106 and you got 105, 104, 103, the school will probably pay. Um, the school will probably pay for your paper to be remarked because, of course, if you pass as a pupil, you will improve the
The ratings of
score.
the school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes. And of
yeah.
course we all know that. So it seems to me from what you're saying is the whole thing is flawed.
Well, okay, so here's another one.
Okay.
So, would you think it was fair if all the pupils took the same exam on the day? Would that be an element of fairness?
No, I don't think so because you don't know what the circumstances of a child at any one time is on the day.
You would, but would you think it would be more fair if all the pupils take the same exam? So every pupil sits down and there's the same exam in front of them. Would that be an element of fairness if they all took the same exam?
I suppose so, depending if it's not rigged that
Exactly.
43% are
But yeah,
going
well,
to
there's that
fail.
not fairness.
Yeah.
Well, there's four different exam boards who set four different papers.
Right.
So there will be pupils, the different papers. They're
So
allowed.
yeah. So if you happen to get a paper that's a little bit easier for you,
Yeah,
and your friend has got a different, in a different school or just over the border or somewhere else,
yeah.
and you say, "Did you do question 4 on that? What was
The
that?
question four would be different.
Be different."
They're allowed slight differences in topics. it would be set out in a completely different way. So yeah, there's four different exam boards set in four different papers, and there's two different levels. So there's a higher paper that goes from 9 down to a level 4, and there's a foundation paper that goes up from a 1 to a
Hmm.
level 5. So when they come to dish out these results, they have to get the balance between four different exam boards over two different levels.
This is, I mean, it's just a nonsense because you could be in one part of the country,
Yeah,
your family could well be moving to another
yeah,
part of the country
oh
where
yeah.
you are potentially having a job,
And you've got
and
to,
you've sat a paper that perhaps is may or may not be relevant to that
yeah.
area, but with that catchment of kids, and you move down to another area where perhaps that
and
paper is just very
and your
different.
and your pupil has and your child has to take a completely different exam board with the questions set out completely differently. You know what it's like if you're going on a car journey. If
Mm,
you're going to work and it's a familiar journey, you can arrive without thinking anything of it. I know
yeah.
sat changed it, but if you set off somewhere, obviously it's before sat navs, but if you remember setting off somewhere on holiday you'd never been before, it's a completely different journey
Well,
because
even if you're on the same journey and there's a diversion
yeah,
and you're going, oh, hang on, we've got to go. You're suddenly out of your comfort zone, aren't you, for a moment?
exactly. So, but it's brilliant how they manage the so you've got those four different exam boards.
Yeah,
Brilliant how they align them. You know how they align them?
no idea.
They say that they align.
Well, that's a genius, isn't it?
Genius, isn't it?
They all align because we
They,
say so.
they all align. And what they say is they say so it then becomes the other way around. So let's say you're AQA and you think, well, hang on a second, we think our paper's a lot tougher than EdXL. We really should have more A stars than EdXL. The people above them say, prove it. So it happens in reverse.
I see.
So they don't prove that they're equal. You have to prove that they're not equal. And of course,
So then that's again humans
was it?
making.
Do you think AQA would be popular if they turned around and said, "Oh no, 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 we want everything checked. We think we should have more."
Hmm.
But of course,
Of
yeah,
course, they wouldn't know because they don't
yeah,
want it to be checked in case it comes back that they're not more.
no,
So they have that certain element of control.
yeah,
I mean, this is so. So when I said the exam system is flawed, it is flawed completely.
yeah. Was it? Here's another. Was it a little bit of a contentious one? Gender.
Right.
So when I started teaching, uh, it was a bit closer between boys and girls,
Yeah.
and there was a real move to improve. There was a real move to get more girls into maths, English, and science, and this was encouraged. And the when I first started teaching, there was an oral exam in maths. 5% of the exam was an oral exam. There was a tape that was played, or well, no, you read 8 questions, and then the pupils would have a certain amount of time to answer. And boys did, on average, better at this than girls, and that disappeared. Now you have so the 5A stars to C measure. This isn't. It's occasionally mentioned, but 60% of girls, approximately 60% of girls get 5A stars to C, where only 50% of boys get 5A stars to C. So there's a 10% difference between boys and girls. And they was it in maths, it's not it's a lot narrower than that. But they know the reason why. There's a slight difference in learning styles of boys and girls. Boys prefer um, facts and logic and maths, and girls prefer narratives. And there's been a move over time whether it's purposefully to suit girls rather than boys, but there's been a move over time. So subjects like history learn about the slave trade rather than
Right.
facts and dates. Subjects like geography will learn about climate change, a narrative rather than facts.
Yes.
And this has suited girls. The maths exam has become a lot more wordy than it used to be. Um, so there's a gender split. They know why, but there is, this isn't all over the Guardian. Let's do something about this. It's just, oh well, tough on boys, I'm afraid. But if you think of GCSEs, the if maths, there's not much of a difference between girls and boys. If you think of all GCSEs, they are a lot closer to English than they are to maths. So if you take history,
Yeah.
there's no maths in it. You take geography, there's no maths in it. You might have to learn a few facts, but it's gone more narrative.
Yeah.
But you could have in geography, you could have a maths section, like a statistical analysis section.
Yeah.
And if you did that, that would change the profile of who passed geography and who didn't.
I know that. Sorry to interrupt you here,
No,
but
no,
when
no.
I was talking to Crypto Rich, who was talking about homeschooling a few
Yeah, yeah,
days ago, and one of the things that he was saying was, with homeschooling, there are three divisions of it. The third division that he explained was sort of I can't remember the term, something like unschooling or not a curriculum based thing, project based. So you would
yeah.
take dinosaurs, for example, for small kids,
Uh-huh.
and when you start talking about dinosaurs, you're encompassing all the sciences, all the subjects, because you've got the history of the dinosaurs, you've got the size and scale, and so you can talk about and the time period and how much they might eat over. So you could use maths for that,
Yeah.
the numbers of them and how they diet or whatever. You could do geography, of course, by saying where they all are. So you would encompass through a project all those different things, and then of course you'd write it up as perhaps an essay or something, and then you've utilized English. So in a project-based system, you're not separating all of those core subjects. And my point being is that seemed to be a more holistic way of doing it,
Uh-huh.
which, because of that, you're not slurring it in one way for boys or girls
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all nice, but in the bigger sense, it doesn't matter
And I understand that, but
because
if
because
you if
let's yeah go
well,
on.
let me just make this point, and then tell me why it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Because if you've gone project based,
yeah,
that's gearing you, I would have suggested, for the world of work in which you have an understanding of a much bigger thing. So even if you ended up, let's say, in a factory
yeah,
where you've got a number of jobs which you do, you can still think, oh, I've got to count these things, or I've got to, you can still use a number of those skills why I'm doing this. It's not just these very basic pulled apart skills, which
yeah,
I think you need, but not necessarily to be
yeah,
examined on,
yeah.
because it just seems to me that the whole system you've described is completely flawed, completely unfair,
Yeah.
and shouldn't be tolerated. But tell me why. Tell me why a project-based system is not right.
See, over the 24 years of teaching, you would have a deputy head would stand up and be very enthusiastic. Oh, I've just heard of this project in Leicester.
Mm.
All the pupils are made to use their left hand for 10 minutes a day, and it improves results by 10%. So everybody's going to use their left hand or whatever.
Mm.
This school uses group work, so all the pupils going to work in groups. This school uses dinosaurs, so we're all going to use dinosaurs. How can you so let so in that might work for you and your child or even you and your school, but it can't work across the country. 43% still fail. So it doesn't matter in the sense that if you're that person in that factory, you may have your skills, but if you don't have your GCSE paper,
Yes.
you can't go and get that job. which
Yes, and that's I mean that's the biggest thing, isn't it? You can teach the subjects, but you're being pushed through a system
yeah,
which is biased
yeah. Was
and
it?
will impact your future career because your future and the industry and workplace is
Yeah,
also part of that by like with doctors and nurses they've
yeah,
been cajoled into thinking it's important to have this degree in, as you say, in Shakespeare, when actually as a nurse you're not going to be getting down on your knee and going,
no, 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 no. Well,
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
no, you're
Sorry,
not
mate, can I please get this drip in my arm?
exactly. But it's even I was going to say it's even worse. But it used to be that you could be very very good at English. So I'm really really good at English, but I fail
Yes,
my maths. I can't do maths, and you
yes,
would literally go through English A level, English degree, go and become an English teacher.
yeah.
No, you can't
You can't because you haven't got the maths.
because you haven't got the maths.
So tell
But
me about
you
Richie
can't.
Sunak because he's pushing that. He's pushing the maths now.
But if exactly, so you notice he's gone quiet, and it's a very simple reason. So if you say to right, let's just divide it up. The nurse thing. I'm only using the nurse thing as a measure. It's like an
Yes,
equivalent job.
yeah,
So the nurses are currently going on strike at the moment for a pay rise. The average salary for a nurse is £36,500. Okay. I'm not saying that they don't deserve it, but it's £36,500. And roughly half the population can't apply for that. The nearest equivalent job to being a nurse is a care assistant. Okay. So a care assistant's average salary is £16,500. You can't leave being a care assistant to be a nurse without your English and maths. Even if you could be wonderful,
yes.
you
And
won't be able.
all that experience
All that
that you've had, yeah,
experience
counts
it
for nothing.
counts for nothing. You can't start giving people injections. You can't learn how to give people injections. So that's the divide.
Mm.
If you then so if you're going to fail 43% and never let them pass, it
So
you
are you saying then actually the exam system
uh-huh.
has been geared the way it is because the industry has required extra qualifications that aren't needed?
No,
Right. I'm glad we got that clear.
no, no. It's one of those things that has built up. It's a bit of a protection racket, by universities. You're not allowing half
Yeah.
the population to get these jobs, and it really has become entrenched, but not in certain areas. So it doesn't get if you could get A stars across the board, but you're not going to get in Liverpool or Man United's first team. You're not going to be, the writer of Harry Potter.
No.
It doesn't go across everything. It's just in specific areas. But if you are 16 years old and you haven't passed maths and you want to be a nurse but can't, so you go and become a care assistant. If someone says to you, we want you to stick around, and I'll come on to this, we want you to stick around and carry on doing this maths. But if you're never going to pass, you
Why would
no
you stick? Yeah.
you want to if you're going to be earning 16,500, this is how money works. It doesn't matter the salary of a nurse, it doesn't matter the salary of a house. It's the comparative salary between people who don't have qualifications and people who do.
Yeah.
So if you don't have qualifications, you're on 16 and a half.
Yeah.
You've got a protected job by your Pythagoras and Romeo and Juliet, and you're on 36 and a half. You can buy the house and the other person can't.
Mm.
That's it. And if you are never going to be allowed to pass these qualifications, the best thing that you can do is get out and get earning as quickly as possible because
Yeah.
you're going to have 16 and a half. If you had to stick around until you were 18, 19, 20, you've lost you've lost 4 years of earning and you still don't have the qualifications to go and earn the £36,500.
So, I mean, you painted a grim picture here and people will be going, oh my goodness, my kid's in there. It's a bit of a lottery, it seems, because even if they do well, 43% of them are not going to get the necessarily grades unless they go back into the pot, and then it's
Yeah.
a roulette game. So, what are the solutions?
What was it? The solutions, I think, are almost have to be kind of at the political end. Was it you will there's been a to me what's happened now is it isn't rich and poor, it isn't left wing and right wing. The main split in society is qualified people versus unqualified people. You've got a complete split. There's not much difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, in my opinion, at the moment. They're quite paper thin. It's just, who gets voted in is who the public thinks is more competent at the moment. But if you're historically the Labour Party and you're supposed to be looking after the working class, you might think you do, but you cannot. The Labour Party has now become the party of the qualified class, doctors, nurses, people with degrees basically run the Labour Party, and they, back up that idea.
Yeah.
So if you don't think of somebody as poor, if you think of somebody as unqualified,
Yes, but unfairly so.
unfairly so,
Because if you
so you
just
you
use the
can't
term unqualified, it sort of has the
exactly. No,
resonance that they're dim or thick or unable
and
to.
that is absolutely not what I'm saying.
No, I know you're
If you
not,
don't
but
have
that's
these
what I'm saying.
yeah. So if you don't have these qualifications, no political party supports you, and you
Yes,
know it
yes,
because it's a very simple thing. If you're the Labour Party, I'm picking on the Labour Party because they're supposed to look after the working class. You cannot support unqualified people and nurses at the same time. It's impossible because you're saying to somebody, a care assistant on £16,500, okay, we'll get you a 5% pay rise. So they get a pay rise. Nurses are going to get a 5% pay rise. So what's 5% of 16,500 and what's 5% of 36,500?
exactly.
That gap doesn't narrow. You've done nothing for them.
No,
What unqualified people want to be able to do is to go and be a nurse.
yes, to
There is
qualify. They want to be
qualified.
able to
They
qualify.
want they want, yeah. So
What you're saying is this needs a root and branch, whole new approach to the exam system to make it fair, so that people can do that, rather than have this divide and conquer system where you're putting one side of people against another, for nothing to do with intelligence or ability, just a rigged, unfair, skewed system in which you've got people who are effectively oppressed
yeah.
because they cannot do anything to up the ante because of the roulette game that they've been put into.
Yeah. Was it? And I've got a couple of other like specific things. Was it what happened with this major pressure on schools to get these results? Was that schools, instead of just letting this thing happen, schools went absolutely crazy trying to get pupils to pass English and maths. And it became a bit of well, it still is. It's schools are competing against each other for,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so, but basically what happened, because you need English and maths, other subjects were getting squeezed. So pupils would get taken out of geography to go and take extra maths lessons, or taken out of RE or taken out of PE to try and get them to pass maths. And it got to the stage where the main thing that you could do as a school would be to early entry your students. So you would enter nearly everybody or all your entire year. You'd enter them a year early at the end of year 10. And then you would have a cohort that had passed.
Right.
And then you could start to focus in. And then you'd re-enter them again at the start of year 11. So technically, so it was that, and this became a bit of an arm race. It became
Well,
a
I was
bit
going to
expensive.
say, once one does it, another does it, and another does it.
So schools were entering pupils 3 times. Now, this was costing the school. This was costing the school, well, the government money,
Mm.
and of course, as well, it wouldn't look good, would it? Because you've then lost the control of that normal distribution curve, because you would have someone take it in year 10, along with people resitting it for the third time in year 11. And it would be, right, well, how do we separate these people out now?
Mm.
You'd have people who would take it in the end of year 10 and get the old C grade, and then they would concentrate on other subjects. Some pupils would get a C and carry on and try and get an A. So you'd have people getting 3 grades, and those 3 grades were more often than not different. And it kind of a bit of shattered the illusion of these things being a universal qualification.
Yeah.
So the government stepped in. It was Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings, I think, at the time, stepped in and stopped this, but they did it in a very interesting way. They wanted it. They wanted to get back control of the situation and have pupils tested just once at the end of year 11. So what they did is they leaked it to the press that teachers were being terrible to poor little Timmy and Tammy or whatever, that they were making pupils take endless exams, making them take maths 3 times. And the journalist did no research and just went, "This is terrible."
Yeah.
Now, if this is what's happening, that if you fail, it's bad news. Would you like 3 goals or would you like one?
Well, you'd like to be having that second go, I suppose.
Yeah.
Even
So,
even if it is a rigged game to start with.
yeah. But they did it in a very interesting way. So instead of saying to schools, you can't enter, they said to schools, you can carry on entering early, but your measure as to whether you're a failing school or not goes on the pupil's first attempt. So let's say you
Oh, I
had,
see. So yeah, so
yeah,
I can see what you're saying. So if you're entering someone who's not really ready for it
yeah,
and they fail,
they
the
fail.
school is being
So,
reflected
yeah,
by the amount of. In other words, they're trying to say don't put them in too
yeah.
early
But
because
but
you'll
in
get
this
more failures.
but in this Machiavellian way.
Yeah.
So it's so so what happened is that all the schools folded and just went to
The one system.
the one system. Now, does that suit your child?
We're running out of time, Nigel.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Unfortunately,
sorry.
no, 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 no,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
no.
yeah,
No, of course it doesn't
yeah,
suit the child. It seems to me, having spoken to you, that I would, if my child was in the system, I would
yeah,
get them out of the system as quickly as possible and get them as independent as possible and get them to start up their own bloody business.
yeah,
So, and we need more independent businesses rather than these great big conglomerates that everybody seems to be funneled into,
yeah,
of which 43% won't be anyway because of the failing things. It seems to me one of the solutions is to encourage people to be more independent
yeah,
and concentrate on what's best for them, rather than, as you say, tirelessly try and keep doing exams and aim for an area in which they're already the goalposts have been moved away from.
definitely.
Does that sound a
Yeah.
reasonable a
Can I,
takeaway from the conversation?
yeah, can I squeeze in 2 quick things? Is that okay
Yeah,
with
yeah,
you?
no, please do.
So yeah, so you mentioned about September. There is a big difference between the performance of pupils who basically were born in September and in August. So it varies. It's like between 6 and 8%. So there's between 6 and 8% better pass rate for pupils who are born in September than for pupils who are born in August, which then means you end up with 11 to 15% extra September born nurses than August born birthdays. Now that can't be right, can it?
No,
That you've got more September nurses than August nurses.
they're
The
going
other,
to have their birthday at the same time and not appear at work because they'll be too pissed from the party that they've just had the night before.
but again, was it something else to watch out for in your school thing? So if these pupils that haven't passed and
Mm.
then they go into college, they will be then doing a level 2 course. No more history, no more geography. That's all gone for them. And they'll be doing things like public services, leisure and tourism. And then that qualification will be at a level 2 course. which basically a GCSE course. When they pass that, they need to pass like the equivalent of A levels, a level three to go on to university. If they pass the level two course, say in business studies, they used to be able to go and do a level three course in business studies, even though they haven't passed maths and English. But they've stopped that. You can't go from qualify. So you can't go from being good at business studies in level two to go and do business studies in level three. You would have had to have reset your English and maths and pass that. So you can't get beyond that. There's an absolute block on that. And now, meanwhile, you're now 18. But of
Mm.
course, colleges get paid for bums on seats. So you'd be offered public services rather than a level three. Because it happened in reverse. What happened in reverse is that universities turned around and said, hang on a second, you've got somebody who's just passed public services level three, and you're saying that they can go and do a degree. Yes, they haven't passed their maths and English. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you that your course is clearly not a level three course because people are able to pass it who don't have maths and English. So we're going to stop underwriting your course unless you stop these people going on the course who don't have maths and English. So the course stays the same,
Yeah.
but now you
The
don't
entry
get to
level.
go on, but you don't get to go on that course until you've passed maths and English.
Yeah.
It's a block.
Yeah. This is, I mean, it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And people don't know this, do they? Going into
No.
the system, they have absolutely no concept. It would be interesting to hear from the viewers how many people know that this is happening, or have any inkling that it's happened to them.
Exactly.
This is just outrageous.
Yeah.
And as you say, so ultimately, this needs to be thrashed out with politicians who are setting the schools, but also
It would be nice. It would be nice if I don't think the idea of a universal qualification is as strong as it purports to be.
right.
Um, if if you see somebody on the telly as an actor, you've got no idea of
No.
the qualifications. If there's an entrepreneur who's a multi-millionaire, it's got no connection. There's no correlation between the
Well, one of the things that I certainly think that what isn't being pushed is, and you often see these multimillionaires, and they'll come on and they say, "Well, I left school at 15,
yeah,
didn't need it," and I think more of that needs to be encouraged. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, of course it's not,
yeah,
and some people will want to go in those professions in which they need those qualifications in
yeah,
order to get it. But it would be, it seems to me from talking to you now that not only is the exam system flawed, completely flawed, and pitted against a number of people, but also certain businesses also need to think about what their entry level things are. Because
yeah.
if you're a nurse using that example, and you're and of course that's set by the government presumably, or some sort of governmental thing, is saying that we won't take nurses unless you've got maths, in which the degree of maths required for the operating the job, of being able to go, well, I need 50 mil of this thing to put into you to help you, or put you on a drip, or what have you, which you're going to learn
Yeah.
as part of your nurse training.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it just seems, the whole system seems
Yeah.
bonkers.
But imagine how the two different systems work or used to work would be, let's take, say, like journalism.
Mm.
You've one route, you're good at English, and then you go and study journalism at a university and English and what have you, and you get high grades, and the BBC says we'll pluck you and take you and come along. The other alternative route to being plucked by the BBC would be to leave school at 16, go and work for your local paper. So
And
there
work
would
your way out.
and work your way up, but there would be thousands of people across the country going into local papers, going in, starting YouTube channels or whatever that that people do now. And imagine if you worked at some a small select group of people that worked in local newspapers, went to football games and wrote it up, went to fires, did a bit of photography there. Their experience over 4, 5, 10 years could be, for the best people, would be phenomenal.
Absolutely.
But if you're the BBC and you have a criteria of where we only want, I hate bunny fingers, the best people, so we're going to get people who come out with firsts from, Oxbridge universities.
Well, and of course you
Look at,
see that you see
yeah,
the Muppets in control of places who've
yeah,
come up through just getting a qualification, but no experience, no world knowledge,
no,
nothing really to add. And
no,
you see that with career politicians, don't you? I mean, we see that, and that's probably partly why we're in the crap that we're in with the world. Is
exactly.
because you haven't got the people coming from the ground
Yeah,
up and
actual,
utilizing worldwide experience.
actual real experience.
Yeah.
You know,
We,
when
we
yeah, when you're doing your driving test, you're learning how to drive and you go and drive.
yeah.
When you're doing GCSEs, that's not the thing that you're going to be doing.
No, you're not going off into be a maths expert, and you need
No,
to, you're not turning into Einstein.
no.
So absolutely, I'm going to have to sort of
Yeah.
tail it here, unfortunately, because
Sorry.
we've done an
I,
hour,
I
and I
said I
don't.
said there was a lot.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I can see that one could go further into this, but
Yeah.
if we've only whetted people's appetite to go and explore the subject a bit more, particularly if they've got children who are entering into the school system and thinking, blimey, didn't know about this. It's something to
Yeah.
talk to your school. Would a school admit to this, the 43% failure, if you approached them directly and said, I've watched this podcast, I've watched this video.
Well, they would have to acknowledge that there is a failure rate behind
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
But was it on a more positive note? Was it something as beautiful as York Minster?
yes,
The people that built that,
yes. They didn't have a maths
they
GCSE
they didn't
qualification.
know. They didn't know. They wouldn't know Pythagoras. They would
No,
not know division. They would not know multiplication. They would have a right angle. They would know about right angles. They would have experience of building that had built up and built up and built up. But that's got to be the most beautiful building and long-lasting building in York. Yeah, it was
yeah.
built by people who
Who were
were
dim,
pretty
unqualified.
were unqualified.
Yes, yes, and not dim at all. But
No.
that's it. That's how it would be. Well, we've
Yeah.
got to change that system somehow. And certainly in my world, that would be the first. One of the first things you've got to give the next generation hope, and something to aim at. And yeah.
Well, you're doing a great job, Richard, and
Oh,
I'm
thank you
really
very
thank you
much.
for having me on.
Well,
Really thank
Nigel, it's been an absolute joy. I was going to mention that in your part time, you do a lot of metal
Oh, right,
detecting,
yeah, yeah.
which
Thank you very
because you're
much.
retired, you're a retired teacher now, so you don't have to have
Oh,
those.
it's marvelous.
I
Oh, it's
bet it is.
marvelous. Oh no.
I mean, there's so much about teaching that one could ask, like having big classrooms and
Yeah,
all of that, but we haven't got time now.
yeah.
And you also do fell running.
Yeah, was it so, thank you for letting me mention it. Was it I've just got a very tiny metal detecting channel, Detecting Daft, something light-hearted after
Give me the links. I'll put them in the description. People can
right,
go
yeah,
and find out.
yeah.
This
So yeah,
this.
so was it made nice little Bronze Age axe here?
Wow, look at that.
Three
Bronze,
thousand.
you see? Yeah, you don't need a qualification. Do you need GCSE maths to metal
If,
detect?
if those university types get their claws on it, then you
Then
will.
you would. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And presumably you need maths for fell running.
well, so the fell running thing, it's running up hills is yeah,
Tough.
but it is probably apart from what we've just talked about, one of the things that I'm most pleased with and proud of that I've done since retiring is was it I wrote a comedy, Reluctant Fell Runner.
Wow,
That,
look at that.
that's up on Amazon. So it's a comedy, but I've put it up on YouTube under the Reluctant Fell Runner as a comedy, and I've done all the silly and daft voices myself. So although I've had a little dig at the BBC today, I am waiting for them to call
To
from.
pick it up, yeah, absolutely. That 12-part series that then turns into a big feature film. Of course, it's going to happen.
Exactly.
And you've got
Exactly.
your GCSE to throw
Exactly.
at them.
And I've got the qualifications as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Nigel, it's been an absolute
No,
joy.
brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that's been entertaining and also informative, something that you didn't know about the educational system and the examinations. And we'd be very interested in your comments, so do bung them below. Until next time from Nigel and I, bye-bye.